Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to session 5 of the third global conference of the One Planet Network's Sustainable Food Systems Program. And the session is called Investing in Food Systems Transformation. The session was organized jointly by the Global Alliance for the Future of Food and its allied initiative, Transformational Investing in Food Systems. My name is Rex Raymond. I'm the director of the initiative, and I'm pleased to moderate the session together with my colleague, Matteo Zanella, who is the program director of the Beacons of Hope program of the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. This session is about investing in food systems transformation. I think we all know, and we've been hearing a lot during this conference about how food systems work for some, but are harmful to others. We see some reports even estimating the hidden cost of global food and land use systems at $12 trillion. The largest impacts of those impacts are the largest impacts that are arising from ag and food systems are often economically invisible and inadequately considered by decision and policymakers, including investors. And that presents significant risk. It seems that we need models for including investable business models and large-scale bankable projects that consider and integrate outcomes across natural, social, and human capital that ultimately transform the food and agricultural sectors. So in this session, we decided to explore some of the models and some of the challenges and opportunities related to those innovative models, sometimes models that are steeped and grounded in age-old knowledge, and explore the opportunities to create the enabling environments for those businesses and those business models to thrive and contribute to food systems transformation. We recognize that public and private finance are essential to this transformation. We also recognize that there are both challenges and new opportunities emerging by better coordinating those different forms of finance. So we have a fantastic panel for you today to help explore those issues. We will start with two models, two organizations that are working on the ground with farmers, with consumers, creating the business models that recognize the many forms of value that farmers and other land managers are creating. So, and then following their presentations, we will organize and discuss some of the opportunities and challenges of our global community to direct funding, again, both from public and private sources, to the types of activities and the types of business models that generate positive value and positive outcomes, both for farmers, for consumers, but also for the communities in which we live, and ultimately for the earth as well. We will look forward to comments and questions from participants, so please place those questions in the chat box, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. And without further ado, let's start with our first two presentations. So I am very pleased to introduce our first two speakers. The first speaker will be Dr. Krishna Gopal Grandi from the Access Livelihoods Group in India. Access Livelihoods is a 15-year-old collective of 6 enterprises that was created with the intent to transform the lives of producers in rural and urban India. It's doing so through very kind of direct work with cooperatives, often women-led cooperatives that are practicing agroecological farming practices and other related activities, and connecting them with consumers to place a high quality product in the market. So Dr. Krishna Gopal will make our first presentation, and he will be followed by Dr. Dale Lewis, who is the CEO and founder of Community Markets for Conservation, which is a company, an organization in Zambia, Africa, that is focused on elephant conservation, and has built a model for an integrated product and supply chain for a number of products that are now available to consumers in Zambia and soon elsewhere as well. And similarly, the model is really structured to recognize the value that farmers and their communities are creating by protecting the land, protecting wildlife, and creating the revenue streams and investment opportunities to support that value that's being created. So let me turn over to our first presenter, Dr. Krishna Gopal Grandi, and over to you.
So thanks, Rex, and hello everyone. I am Krishna Gopal, and I'm right now based at Hyderabad in India. What I would like to present is how we are trying to develop a business case for sustainable food systems by working with small and marginal farmers within the country in India. Before we actually look at the model of how we are enabling sustainable food systems, we would like to give a picture of what it is for a small farmer within the country in India, like a country like in India, where almost 70% of them are small and marginal farmers. What is it that they get as an access to investments? Typically, the transaction sizes of small farmers is around $136, and they experience very high cost of capital being delivered. Most of them are away from the formal credit. More than 41%, more than 60% of the farmers still don't have access to the formal financial systems. And most of the credit that is still available is only for crop loans, which means that they cannot really make any significant investments within the food systems. And there is a perceived risk in lending towards small and marginal farmers. So when we say transforming sustainable food systems, with this kind of a background where small farmers do not have any access to the investments, it's very little that can be done to really transform the sustainable food systems. But it isn't all that bad. There are enough opportunities around. The opportunities that we see is that young people and women within the agriculture and food systems today are having higher appetite for risk as well as investments, much different from the earlier times. And this we should recognize, and we should make investments with these people if we really are interested in creating sustainable food systems. The second thing that we see is that technology is penetrating rapidly. In fact, India has the lowest cost of data today across the world, and therefore it allows us to use the modern technologies, which includes blockchains, precision agriculture, and all of this, to reimagine the way food systems are organized and aligned. Now, coupled with this, the fact that supply chains are really inefficient within India. More than 40% of food gets wasted. That's $7.9 billion every year, and it happened in an era where we at least have 7 to 8 intermediaries across the supply chain trying to help cover the entire food system. Like I said earlier, technology has the scope to really reimagine this entire thing. And the most important trend that we are observing is that there is an increased health consciousness, and consumers within India are today ready to pay higher premium to get safe and healthy food, fresh food, and the market is growing at a much rapid pace of 10%. That's what we observe. So if we have to address the constraints that the farmers are facing and capitalize on the opportunities, the business model that we have put across, and we have been working around for the last 15 years with 65,000 small and marginal women farmers, is first helping them to organize themselves into producer companies. These are companies which are owned by the women themselves. And in a cluster where we have around 5,000 to 7,000 women who are agriculture farmers and who are also small and marginal in nature. They come together, they set up a company, and through these companies, the women farmers are serviced with agroecological and sustainable production based services and inputs. These includes bio inputs that are given to the farmers. Finance is made available, and we have a hyper local credit delivery model where the turnaround time is very low and the credit cost is still kept low. Unlike the microfinance world, where the credit cost goes up to 24 to 26%, through our model, we are able to deliver finance at 15% at the end user level. And then using these investments, we create agro-processing parks, which are completely owned by the women. And once they have a processing unit, they produce quality products which can be placed in market. And for that, we are developing a brand called Creo, which is a P2C kind of a brand where supply chain has been reimagined and producers are directly connected to the consumers through a traceable agri-supply chain solution. Traceable agri-supply chain solution looks at data being captured through a variety of means at each stage of your production process, right from the farmer end to the consumer end. And this definitely gives a substantial confidence to the consumer that the produce that has been serviced to them has been grown in a sustainable way. And also it gives a confidence to the entire system that if there are any errors or any tracing that has to be done across, whether it is at the input stage or production stage or at post-harvest stage, the entire thing can be clearly tracked out. So for this to happen, we require investments at two levels. One is at individual level, where we are trying to look at transition of the farmers from conventional chemical farming systems to an agroecological sustainable farming practice. And second, a subsistence farming kind of a farmer who is a small farmer transits to a farmer entrepreneur. Now, this means that investments have to be made for enhancing soil organic matter, enhancing soil moisture content, integrating livestock so that an additional income comes into the small and marginal farmers, and bio inputs are provided, and at the same time certification is done so that the consumer is given a confidence saying that this particular the produce from this particular farm is really safe, and it is also takes care of the environment in a sustainable way. Now, our backend calculation says that such a transition where you are helping the farmer to undergo these major two transitions requires around $7,600 per farmer. At the collective level, where we build in a cluster of 5,000 women farmers to come together at various stages, where we involve farming the producer company to the level of ensuring working capital being available for the processing to happen, we expect an investment of around 3.5 million at the collective level. When you put in such a kind of an investment, it is possible to completely transform the entire food system. And what we have observed is to transform this kind of a food system, the nature of capital that is required is completely different. It is a combination of equity, debt, and grant, all of which will result into a blended finance, reduce the cost of delivery, and at the same time ensure that it is patient, and therefore it will result into transformation. Transformation usually requires that kind of patience, which also meant that the financial products that we were trying to use were required us to innovate on social impact bonds, quasi-equity debts, where equity comes in as a almost like structured in a way of a debt, where it is patient for 6 to 7 years, but yet there is a guaranteed yield for the investor. There are loan guarantees that has to be worked out and risk pooling that has to be done. So it was all of these innovations which are required to invest into what we now call as an almost trying to replicate the most successful development model in the food systems, which is the Amul model, where dairying operations across the country were integrated through a multi-tiered institutional structure, which was built on cooperatives and producer companies. We are trying to use the same system within the agricultural space, where at the cluster level we have the agro processing zones and producer companies. At the village level you have procurement centers, and these procurement centers extend the financial services to the women at the grassroots level. But interestingly, here the model is to not give the loans or credit in the form of cash, but in the form of in kind, as inputs or as delivery of a particular service, which is then repaid through the output being procured. So this is the kind of a system that we have established as our delivery model and the grassroots level. And through this kind of a delivery model, we have been able to ensure that we are in line to create the next largest food system model, where the women farmers are directly connected to the consumers, and consumers do get the value out of this entire food reimagined food system. With that, I would like to thank Rex for this opportunity to make the presentation.
Rex, I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead. It was my mistake. Okay. I had muted myself. My apologies. So first of all, Krishna Gopal, thank you for that presentation, and we'll come back to you with some questions. But that's I think people can already start to see how kind of integrated capital finance is required to create these kind of multiple positive outcomes across a system. Dale, I think you'll have another story to tell where you're trying to where you're achieving kind of similar impacts, but with your own unique model. So go ahead.
Well, thank you, Rex. Let me start by introducing Veronica Zulu. She's had a tough life as a farmer in Zambia's Luangwa Valley. Trying to feed a family of four, being the only parent, struggles to get her children in school, and often she had to work on other people's fields to get the money she needed, and leaving her own fields to weed. That was 7 years ago, and today her situation is very different. She gets around on a bicycle, managed to put roofing sheets on her house. For the first time, her family can sleep on a mattress. Children get to school, and they all eat pretty well. And what's made the difference really is that Veronica understands how to keep her soils fertile by farming with a particular tree called Gliricidia sepium, as you can see in this picture. This is one of her 3 fields. And it allows nutrients to be recycled and replenished. She introduces a great deal of organic matter from the rotation with legumes, and she really doesn't use fertilizers, and she certainly eliminates much of the greenhouse gases that she otherwise would have put in the atmosphere. So for Veronica, her soil is her currency that provides for her family. And our company called Kamako is largely the reason why. Now, she is one of 200 or over 200 small-scale farmers that we buy from. We buy their surplus food crops at premium prices, and we offer the premium prices so these farmers stick to the farming practices that Veronica has adopted. And this past year, as an example, we paid out $3.2 million injected that into the rural economy for over 8,000 tons of crops. And from these crops, we produce 17 different food products under a single brand that we call It's Wild. And by the way, that's Veronica in the lower right corner, a very happy farmer now. So if I can have the next slide. Well, when you put Veronica together with all the other farmers that we support, and I might add, over 1,700 of these farmers are reformed poachers. And I say that because within the landscape where we work, which you can see in the map, close to 140,000 square kilometers, there are 4 very significant national parks, very rich with wildlife. So yes, we do, as a result, reform poachers who pick up the plow instead of their gun. We have managed to put together a large number of farmers, and collectively, what we think we've achieved is probably one of the largest collective farms, at least in Southern Africa. And with that possibility comes 2 really quite interesting points. One is we think that we have the potential, at least, of driving a value chain that is quite significant, rich in terms of the healthy benefits of the types of foods that we produce, largely because of the way Veronica and her other farmers farm. And we think there's a tremendous opportunity because there are not many places in the world left where you can get this size farm that can produce really, truly organic food products. And we think there are also very great opportunities in the export market. And in fact, next month, we will be sending our first container to the US. This is not going to be without a lot of headaches and problems. There are a lot of logistic expenses, as you can imagine, of trying to get raw commodities, food commodities from remote areas into our processing plants. There's a steep learning curve for our staff. There's certainly competing brands, and there are certainly expensive financing costs. But I think we're getting there. It's just the process is a bit slow, and I am rather impatient. So I wish we could move faster. Financing is part of the problem. The other opportunity that we have is the potential of restoring very large areas of farmland by restoring soils that have literally been mined out of their nutrients from the wrong kinds of farming practices, and hence being able to restore forests, reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases, and even save a few animals, wild animals as well. So could I have the next slide, please? So the Kamako formula is really very simple. Improving the health of soils by farming the right way equals more sustainable, more sedentary farmers, equals more trees, more wildlife, and really healthier foods that we can all enjoy. And in fact, it is the consumer that makes this process grow and reiterate from year to year. They have the benefit of choosing a product that is healthy and grown by farmers that are restoring soils and keeping other natural resources safe. But we are up against very large multinational companies that have a lot of money that prescribe chemical disruptive farming practices and we promote organic, more nature-based farming practices. They're about profit, and we're about sustainability. They're big, and we're quite small. But we are very ready for this challenge. It is going to be a good fight, and literally every day of the year, this is the fight that we are fighting. We have to really, however, increase our scale of operations to be competitive and impactful. And it's certainly going to take some creative financing solutions, whether it's a blend of combination of grants and patient capital, or perhaps loans that are flexible, that recognize that not every year is going to be profitable, and they're willing to let you pay down on those years when you're profitable and give you a break when you're not so profitable, like this year when we're experiencing so many problems with COVID. But whatever the approach is, this is the time to make the investment. We must act now, and the sooner we do, the more we can save in the future from the growing, enormous environmental and social repairs that are now really beginning to catch up with us. So I think I'll end my talk there. Thank you, Rex.
Dale. So thank you both these two speakers for grounding us in the concrete examples of businesses that are working with many farmers and building the models for connecting or creating the incentives for farmers to use good practices, creating the transitions that both of them talked about, and kind of really with an eye towards how do you create models and revenue streams and financing that recognizes the many types of value that farmers and rural communities create through their good stewardship of the land and other resources. So let me turn now to some reflections from our two other panel members. Our next two panel members, I would say. The next one up is Mr. Daniel Moss from the Agroecology Fund. He's the executive director. He is also a human rights and international development expert, and has been working for many years with groups that are really creating an agroecology movement around the world. So Daniel, maybe reflecting on the examples you've just heard and your work, how do you see the role of philanthropy as in supporting the infrastructure, hard and soft infrastructure, but also the policies and markets that allow these types and other kind of business innovations to emerge that help kind of move and grow both the movement for agroecology and other good practices for managing the land, but also all these other kind of positive values that can be and outcomes that can be created when we take a more holistic and systemic approach, both to how we manage our resources as a global community and in the approach to investing and finance.
Great. Can you hear me okay, Rex?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, fabulous. Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Rex, for inviting me to the panel and for those excellent presentations from Krishna Gopal and Dale, which really ground the work right there in the territories and right there in the enterprises. Let me just give you a little bit of background on the Agroecology Fund and turn to your question, Rex. So the Agroecology Fund, we're a multi-donor fund supporting agroecological practices and policies, and we aim to support food systems based in agroecology, kind of things that Dale and Krishna Gopal described, that promote the economic well-being and human rights of small farmers in their communities and mitigate climate change through low-input agriculture featuring sustainable soil and water use. We link organizations and movements that advance agroecological solutions locally, regionally, and internationally. And we're currently supported by over 30 US, Asian, and European funders that are all committed in our various ways to amplifying agroecological practices and policies. So some of the funders come more from a human rights angle, some more from a biodiversity conservation angle, some more from perhaps a climate change mitigation angle, but all are united in seeing the opportunities, the possibilities of agroecology as a solution to many of the challenges that we face in terms of global hunger and global nutrition and landscape stewardship. And we are guided in our grant making by an international a group of international advisors that are embedded in agroecology movements across the world. And we collaborate with bilateral funders like GIZ and international multilateral bodies such as IFAD and GEF. And we believe strongly in blended finance, and therefore we work closely with our ally, the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, to launch this transformative investment in food system TIFs that Rex described at the beginning of the call. And we know our grant funds are an important catalyst for agroecological enterprises, but we know that private finance, especially in our case, the endowment capital of our member foundations, can be critical as well in terms of program and mission related investments. Our member foundations are sitting on a lot of capital within their endowments and are only granting year by year a portion of that. And even more important than those streams coming from the philanthropic community itself is public finance, which is why we fund a great deal of farmer-led research and advocacy. And let me provide just a quick example. So we're currently working with the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, which is called AFSA, which has a broad mandate to strengthen agroecological farmer enterprises and markets across the continent. They're seeking to sustain small farmer livelihoods with the income that they need. And these entrepreneurs are a strategic lever for amplifying agroecology across Africa. Obviously, we're not going to change the food system in Africa towards something agroecological unless there's an ecosystem of sustainable agroecological enterprises, the kind of thing that Dale described in Zambia. And to do this work systematically, Agroecology Fund is funding AFSA to study the existing operations and needs of agroecological enterprises. In general, as Krishna Gopal and Dale described, agroecological enterprises as a group are under-recognized and poorly networked. Most service providers, the nonprofits, the public funds, the investors, the banks, and technical assistant providers tend to invest in enterprises that are focused more on increasing farmer incomes and harvest yields, without equal attention to holistic measures of community environmental well-being. We're only 5 months into this research work, and what we've learned thus far in the research is through interviews with service providers and enterprises, the entrepreneurs themselves, is just how challenging it is for small farmer agroecological enterprises, both farmers and processors, just to thrive. And the playing field, as we heard from other speakers, it's badly tilted against them. It's not just the lack of finance that they face, but the lack of rural infrastructure, roads, for example, and the neglected local and regional markets. The trade policies tend to invite imports over incentivizing local production. And perhaps most unfair and unsustainable that Dale mentioned is that the subsidies structures tend to favor chemical pesticides and fertilizers, which make the purveyors of agroecological and organic produce less competitive. And the international agro inputs companies have the ear of many governments. And so, like, for example, under the logic of biosafety, in some countries, they're prohibiting the local exchange of seeds and favoring importation of seeds manufactured by Syngenta and Bayer, Monsanto, et cetera. And we hear about across the, we're a global fund, and we fund in 5 continents. And we hear about similar challenges from other partner organizations like the Via Campesina, which represents about 200 million farmers worldwide, and the International Indian Treaty Council, which brings together indigenous people across the Americas. So broad coalitions like AFSA, the Via Campesina, and this Treaty Council, they form part of something that can be described loosely as an agroecology movement, although we tend to use the term movements because there's a lot of diversity and unique character to the movements in their various territories. Returning to the work to AFSA, they're analyzing these specific agroecological enterprise needs, their constraints and their opportunities via the discussions, reports, and meetings. Eventually, we're hoping to craft, support learning communities amongst entrepreneurs to share their challenges and successes, and ultimately to inform one another's strategies. And then ultimately, we hope that through our own network of perhaps the funders that I mentioned, the foundations that have endowment capital, hoping to mobilize strategies for financial and technical support. But at the same time, all the networks we support are pursuing other advocacy in various forms. And so, for example, back to AFSA, we're also funding their climate campaign, which is a campaign with 10 governments in Africa to include agroecology within their climate action plans. And we know that one of the key benefits, the solutions that agroecology offers, is the building of healthy soils, which are sequestering carbon. We support AFSA also in their participation in the civil society mechanism of the Committee on Food Security, a global body that deliberates on food policy, to advance agroecology as a key pillar of agricultural development globally. So they're very much nested while they're doing this work continentally. They're also very much mindful of the importance of international bodies, multilateral bodies that are deliberating on food policy, much as we're seeing with the food systems summit that's planned for later next year. So in closing, I'd say while the goals of the work that we're doing is a successful ecosystem of agroecological businesses, the way to get there is much more than support to the businesses themselves. That's of course essential. We do that to the best of our abilities, but it's necessary to invest in the social movements that are seeking to level the playing field. And so the philanthropic community, as we see it, can play a key role in doing both things, working at the very micro level with the enterprises themselves, but also working with powerful advocacy networks that are seeking to create a just policy environment that will enable these enterprises to thrive. So thanks very much. Back to you, Rex.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That's really helpful to hear this kind of broader framing and really both the micro and the macro issues that need to come together in order to create the transformations that are needed in the system. So we'll probably come back to that with some of the follow-up questions. So let me turn to our next speaker. Ingrid Prem is leads an international program on sustainable agriculture and agroecology for the German Agency for International Development, International Cooperation, my apologies. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us as well. A wealth of experience across your organization, of course, with regards to sustainable agriculture and support for programs worldwide, but also with finance and blended finance vehicles. So let me ask you perhaps if you could just share a few of the lessons about inclusive rural finance models that you've come across in the work of GIZ, and in particular with regards to upscaling agroecology and food systems transformation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rex. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So thank you very much, Rex, and thank you to all the organizers. It's really a pleasure to participate at this session. And first of all, congratulations also to the speakers for the really very impressive examples of long-term success, Krishna Gopal and Dale. So yeah, we already heard from various speakers in the sessions before that our food systems are at a crossroads and they are not sustainable anymore. So coming to the question, what are we doing as GIZ? So as many of you may know, GIZ, we are the German Agency for Technical Development Cooperation. We are mainly implementing projects on behalf of the German government, on behalf of the German Ministry for Economic Development and Cooperation, which is BMZ, together with our partner countries. And our main aim is really to enhance capacities of people and institutions in their own efforts towards sustainable development. So therefore, we're often working on a multi-level approach from giving advisory to national policies or programs and to the local level as well, to the implementation on the field or on a landscape level. And yeah, in overall terms, sustainable agriculture and food systems is one of the priority areas within German Development Cooperation. Our regional focus is in Africa. And looking at the BMZ portfolio, we are delighted to observe that there is a steady increase of initiatives also in the field of agroecology, with already a long-term history and lessons learned, for example, in the field of regional rural development, soil and water conservation, land management, land tenure, land policy issues, inclusive value change, organic agriculture, biodiversity, conservation, and rural finance as well. So I would now like to share some of the lessons learned and challenges likewise on how to contribute to these transformational pathways from the experience of GIZ, both on the field level and as well on the political level. And financing is one of them, financing instruments for these transformational pathways. So my first reflection is to really stick to priorities and the right entry points within the partner countries. So agroecological transition and sustainable food systems have so far not been a very high priority in many of our partner countries and governments or the agricultural ministries. So the challenge is really how to promote that agroecological principles when they are lacking political priorities sometimes. And the common narrative is still that it cannot feed the world. So yeah, we need that paradigm shift, and agroecological and other related approaches, they do offer an opportunity for feeding the world. But while we are all talking about transforming land and food systems to become more sustainable, we sometimes have to ask ourselves if we already know how these transitional pathways really work and where are the right entry points, the right leverage points. So yeah, we heard agroecology is a complex issue. We have to embrace the complexity. But when it comes to the right entry points for the transition, in most cases, there are for sure more hindering factors than enabling factors. And in our experiences, these are mainly regarding to a disbalance of power, institutional setup, incentives, and coordination between the different sectors, governance issues, and the current economic system. So my second reflection, when we're talking about upscaling of agroecology, and there are a lot of promising examples from these approaches in our partner countries, but often they remain still on a very local level and not necessarily gain a political momentum. So therefore, we should really work on how to upscale these innovations. For what we need for it is amongst all social capital and political backing and the right drivers of change. So these agroecological principles have to be incorporated in political programs, in investment planning, and it requires a strong private sector willing to join efforts and invest in partnerships to promote appropriate solutions. Also appropriate solutions and inputs for agroecological transition to professionalize these systems and to gain more productivity, whilst on the other hand, maintain and stick to the planetary boundaries and inclusive approaches. For example, as GIZ, we stimulate more than, for example, ongoing 60 projects worldwide on public-private partnership, for example, for gaining market and access for organic products or cosmetics. Let this be on the input side. In Africa, for example, the recent discussions about biofach in Africa, or for example, other market and sharing platforms for getting markets for agroecology products. Third reflection, when we're talking about financing agroecological transition, we have to talk about subsidies and how to make visible the negative impacts and externalities of our current systems on health, environment, functional ecosystems as a productive basis for agriculture. So what we do have to do is to calculate the real price of food, and instruments like true cost accounting we feel as a very important leverage point at a political level. It's not only about creating new facts and figures. A lot of them is already known in scientific literature, but it's how to make use of them and these economic arguments and these economic language to convince political decision makers. So as GIZ, for example, we support initiatives and projects on how to integrate eco-services into rural planning, into agricultural strategies, to work on schemes for payment for ecosystem services related to agriculture, or to visualize the often hidden costs of land degradation, or financing for soil carbon storage and certification as an example. And we're talking in our experience to financial and tailor-made financial services for smallholders in agroecology. Well, a huge part of the population has no access at all to formal financial services. And this is particularly pronounced in rural areas. So we are a lot working as GIZ with a threefold approach, for example, to develop really knowledge product like analysis tools, training materials, to on the one hand enhance economic and financial expertise of farmers, to really increase the financial and entrepreneurial skills of the farmers, farmers organizations and agri-based enterprises. But on the other hand, also work to increase the agricultural know-how of partner financial institutions, because banks and microfinance institutions often perceive their expansion and their services into the agricultural sector as very risky and expensive, and are rarely present in rural areas, and really rarely respond to the financial need to farmers, especially also with a look to women and youth. So we are working more towards green agricultural credits, for example, for smallholders, or on matching funds that, for example, integrate development partnerships where you unite private, public, and civil society actors, for example, to blend financial and in-kind resources for clearly defined activities aligned with agroecological principles and transformation. For example, to leverage synergies between composting, mulching, and also other aspects. I think I will stop here for leaving room for the questions, just to commence enhancing capacities and also to look at the broader approaches of rural development. Sustainable consumption, food loss and waste is one of the key issues that we also feel, and that we can avoid that there are enormous costs for health systems, both in industrialized countries as well as in our developing countries. So I will stop here for now, and thank you very much, Rex.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. That was terrific. I think a few comments that you made, you and Daniel both made, really link the specific models and challenges that we heard earlier to some of the really broad and global issues that need to be addressed, such as the issues around coordination across public and private investment, but not just investment, but really the way public and private actors engage in rural development, some of the issues around subsidies and the incentives and disincentives that are created through subsidy programs, for instance. Now we have a number of questions in the chat box. We're also a little bit short on time. Let me just ask each of the panel members. So let me start with Krishna, Gopal, and Dale. Just two quick questions, and let's see if we have some time for a quick question for Daniel and Ingrid as well before we start our wrap up. So Krishna, Gopal, let me ask you, there was a question about the cost of capital, cost of finance. And it seems that you have devised a model for keeping that cost keeping that cost quite affordable to the cooperatives and groups that you're working with. What are some of the maybe a key ingredient or a key piece of keeping cost affordable or making capital affordable for these rural groups?
I think the two key points that are critical here is one is that the reason why we have a hyperlocal aggregation is to aggregate the demand and keep the cost low. Second is also to innovate on blended finance, where we are innovatively using grant funds as a guarantee And this probably reduces the risk perceived to lending for these agroecological production systems and lending to small and marginal farmers. And thus it enables, once the risk perceived gets reduced, it allows us to give it at a lower cost. So this is the two key ingredients that I would suggest. One, you aggregate the demand of credit, and second is you blend it with grant funds so as to which will stand as a guarantee.
Great. And I'm sure there are lots of innovations in those areas. But that's a fantastic summary, Krishna Gopal. And Dale, I think maybe somewhat related is, and a question that popped up in the chat is about the demand side of these models. And we've talked quite a bit, even also in this session, on the supply side and the work with the rural communities and farmers, which is of course critical. But the demand side, also, of course, is also very important. And it seems that with your brand, you're reaching consumers in urban populations in Zambia and internationally as well. What are some of the keys for you in sort of setting your brand apart and what's kind of driving the demand for your products?
Right. Thanks, Rex. First of all, in Zambia, there's not really a premium market. Most consumers are very price conscious. We started moving our products through the large retail chain stores, and we've done very well there. But we realized that we weren't getting our healthy food products out to the consumers that are can't afford going to the big, more expensive retail stores. So we have initiated a sort of a chain store of our own called the Green Market Shops, and they're located in the small towns. And we've improvised ways that we can reduce on our packaging, so we can cut down on our packaging costs by having our own dispensers, and people can bring their own packaging. So we've been able to reduce the cost by over 25% for the consumer and still keep our margins fairly intact. But really, for us to be able to really be able to gain traction, and because of the currency losses with the current situation we have in Zambia, the kwacha has devalued over 25% since April. We were going to really move into the export market this year, and didn't happen because of COVID. And that is going to be our big priority. We have good opportunities in South Africa and a very good opportunity in the US. So that's going to be the big story for 2021.
That's very exciting, and I'm sure that was an opportunity that didn't exist before for the farmers and the communities that you're working with.
Well, it's true, but I think the two things that will sell our product: first, the quality has to be there, and the packaging has to be sometimes very precise for the particular country. But the story is so compelling. And really all we're doing is just trying to sell the farmer's story. It's the farmers that can sell our product, because they really have done something good for the land. And I think we're all happy to support that.
That's great. Thanks, Dale. Daniel, quick question. There was a question in the chat about the role of the Global North in supporting and providing financial support. You're working across different economies across the globe. What are some of what would you say is a main kind of takeaway for maybe take the endowments of some of the foundations as for example? What's the role of capital from the Global North in supporting these types of changes in lower income countries?
Yeah, I mean, we recognize that there's the philanthropic sectors are differentially developed in different countries, and I'm here in the U.S., although, as I mentioned, our members are spread across the U.S., Europe, and Asia. I think that the genesis of the fund was the idea that people could, the foundation members could pool their funds, and they could learn from one another and increase their investments in targeted organizations and networks like the ones that I described. The idea, but the genesis of it wasn't strictly speaking to pool funds to make combined investments, but it was really to incentivize other philanthropists to do the same. So I think that it's interesting to see our own growth as an agroecology fund, which it parallels very much, I think, the growth of the agroecology movements and agroecology investments worldwide, which is that we started in 2012 with 4 members, and now we have 31 members. So I think it's just a glimpse of the kind of power of agroecology to address a lot of the global ills, and that requires, though, a lot of peer-to-peer reaching out. So most of our growth in the philanthropic sector is because one foundation collaborates with another foundation, and they see commonality and purpose.
Great, thank you. Ingrid, quick comment from you, and then we'll wrap up. I'll turn it over to Mateus after you. But there was another question about the hidden cost of environmental factors. And I know that your organization has been looking at, for instance, kind of ecosystem markets and other types of kind of payments for ecosystem services. What do you see as prospects for those types of tools in supporting the transition to more sustainable food systems?
Thank you. I think there is a huge potential. I think we really have, if we want to convince politicians and economic players, we do have to use economic language, as simple as such. And if we do not really try to internalize these negative external effects, we will never get the right balance, and we have to work on that. So we find there are a huge amount of promising initiatives on that. But on the other hand, we also have to work on sustainable consumption. We ourselves in the global north and in the south, we have to ask ourselves, how much are we willing to pay for our food, for healthy food? We have to talk about agricultural trade imbalances and power. So I think that there are many factors. We have to look on the input side, we have to look on the consumption side, and we have to look at agricultural trade, which is most great barriers towards really having equitable, healthy, and safe food for everybody.
Great, thank you. Well, let me thank all of the presenters and panel members for this excellent discussion, and quickly turn to my colleague Mateus, who's with the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, with some quick wrap-up comments.
Thank you, Rex. Well, I have the difficult yet exciting challenge of wrapping up such a rich discussion and be very short in time. So I'll just make reference to, before we are organizing the session, we engage in an exercise trying to distill some general recommendations for the conference as a whole. I'll make reference to those and maybe point to 1 or 2 aspects of the discussion that I think speaks directly to the recommendations. So the number 1 that we draft was, we should unlock private, philanthropic, and multilateral investment opportunities in sustainable food systems and better align those opportunities amongst actors for greater impact. And I think we spoke a lot about alignment. I think that was one of the objectives of the session. We heard from blended finance mechanisms, but also heard from, for instance, Krishna Gopal on the kind of investments we need in transitions, in collective organizations, in the infrastructure, both hard and soft infrastructure from different colleagues. And I think this all speaks directly to this recommendation. Second is redirect financial flows of philanthropy, major private investors, banks, and multilateral donor agencies away from harmful actors and practices. There was even a question about it on how can we actually measure these harmful actors and practices. And there are a number of tools available. We mentioned, for instance, true cost accounting, which is associated with the TEEP Agri-Food Framework, which can help us in identifying those. And also the final one is we should redirect financial flows towards desired actions that incentivize, accelerate, and amplify food systems transformations. Obviously, these are very general recommendations, but for each one of those, we have also some specific language. And I think there are many elements that were discussed in the session that could even enrich more the specific recommendations that I think we should be concerned of. I will stop for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mateus. Well, rest me to thank all the participants for joining us today and for the excellent questions submitted in the chat. Much appreciated. And wishing just a reminder that the next session is on Monday, starting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Central European time. And I'd like to wish everybody a good weekend, and signing off.